I'd like to introduce a very special guest and dear friend of mine, Hyacinth. She is a culture and sustainability advocate and singer-songwriter. Thank you so much for joining me on Chai Chats. Now, to maybe help viewers get to know you, why don't you introduce yourself and discuss why you decided to do this with me today?
Thank you so much for having me over. So I've been like really excited about this for a while. I've been telling all my friends that I'm doing something really cool. Um, so yeah, first of all, again, thanks for reaching out. I think it's really important for um, people in the South Asian community to be able to connect with their culture. And also, I think for a lot of us, there's this, we kind of feel detached from our culture, or we want to be sort of detached from being brown or detached from being identified like as brown and having to represent those cultural aspects. But it shouldn't be like that. We should be proud to be South Asian and proud to be brown. And there's there's so many aspects to our culture um, that makes us who we are, and we shouldn't be afraid to kind of um, be proud of it and advocate for it. So yeah.
100%, totally agree with you. And also realizing that our culture is very dense and very rich, right? There's so
Mhm.
many different aspects from song to dance to food, language, stories. Like, I think there's just so much to know about it. And, our ancestors have been practicing it for hundreds or even 1,000 years, right? So it's very exciting as well at the same time.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
Before we get into the chai chat, I wanted to do a short exercise with you called What's in a Name? So, our
Mhm.
names are an extension of our identity and who we are. They link us to often the untold stories of our backgrounds, and I think they're sort of worth sharing to better connect us with each other. So, my question for you is, what does your name mean and where does it originate from?
Um, so Hyacinth is, a lot of people think it's my English name, but it is my name. And it's my only name. Uh, so hyacinth is actually a flower, and it's I'm guessing it's from Europe. And the author T.S. Eliot wrote this really cool poem called "The Wasteland," where he at this one point he talks about this hyacinth girl who's supposedly like this really beautiful girl person, whatever, right? And he's not married to her. She's just probably his mistress or his companion, but she's the most beautiful to him. um, Before I was born, my mom is an artist, and she was working on like a series of paintings, which she called the Hyacinth Girl. And she thought that the Hyacinth Girl was the most beautiful girl, and she's just like this person that it's like like a surreal kind of a person, doesn't exist. And then once I was born, my mom's like, "Oh no, like that's my Hyacinth Girl." So that's kind of how like my name came about.
Oh, that's such a feel-good, special, almost magical type of story. Like, ooh, that's really special, and
Mhm.
that's that's really cool that your mom, she sort of has that closeness to Hyacinth, the Hyacinth girl.
Yeah.
And so to begin, my first question for you is, um, how would you describe your culture to someone who has no idea what it is? So perhaps you could begin by explaining its origins, as well as maybe cherished celebrations, rituals, traditions between you and your family. I know it's sort of a broad question, so it's really up to you and how you want to, I guess, delve into it.
Um, yeah. So So I'm from Bangladesh. So I'm Bengali. That's my ethnicity. There's uh, Bengali people are also in India, in like West Bengal. Um, so our culture is pretty much similar to their culture, or like the in broad sense Bengali culture. Um, but I think with Bangladesh being a Muslim majority, a lot of a lot of the recent like culture right now is heavily influenced by um, both like Bengali culture, which is predominantly Hindu culture, and also like influences of Muslim culture. Um, so while we do celebrate Durga Puja and it's like a really big thing for us, we also celebrate like Eid, um, or just things like that. Um, my favorite festival is Pohela Boishakh, which is Bengali New Year. It's on the 14th of April, and everyone just celebrates their Bengaliness
Mm.
throughout the festival. So there's like, you know, kind of processions, and people are singing and dancing, and everyone's wearing red and white. So it's like a really cool festival. Um, I come from like the old part of Dhaka, which is like the capital of Bangladesh. And um, I used to live in a joint family. So I used to live with like all my uncles and my cousins. And so I have those kind of values of um, like like being in a like setting with everyone,
Yeah.
like a collective setting, but also like it doesn't hinder my like individualistic ideals, which like my parents were very like, even though we come from like a very traditional sort of a family, my parents, because they're both creatives, they were able to like break free from that kind of like limitation of like traditional limitation
Mm.
of things, um and really like support me having my individual opinions. And I hope that was good.
No, I really enjoyed that, and it was interesting to also hear sort of the differences in sort of, you know, the Bangladesh ethnic culture and sort of in India, because I think that sort of sometimes it's confusing for some people to know, like, you know, how Bengali culture is also like diverse in its people, right? From where people come
Mhm.
from and originate from. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. And so I don't want to pronounce or butcher the Bengali New Year's, but it is coming up pretty soon. Do
Yeah.
you have any plans, or like how do you usually celebrate
So when I used to live in Bangladesh, I went to high school in Bangladesh. Um, and like I would wake up super early, like 4 in the morning, get ready, be out by like 5. Because with like Western traditions, like if you think about like New Year's, it starts at night.
that?
Or like, yeah. But with Eastern traditions, everything kind of starts from the break of dawn.
Yeah.
Um, so I would go with like my dad, my cousins, and everything would be blocked. There would be no like transportations. So we would essentially walk from our house to this like festival ground,
Yeah.
where they would like start with like classical music in the morning, and it was just like really calming and beautiful. Obviously, like it's really hard to do that here. Um, but this year we're actually doing something really cool with like the Bangladeshi Students Association at like different universities in Ontario. And we're kind of doing this like virtual New Year's thing. And it's going to be really cool because I'm like a part of it and stuff. So I'm excited.
Oh, that's really cool. And
Yeah.
it sounds sort of nostalgic to hear, you know, how, you could walk to sort of the festival grounds and sort of be immersed in the music, and maybe if there's dance and food, like, could you tell me more about sort of the experience, back in Bangladesh, what sort of festivities look like?
Um, yeah, so my favorite one is Pohila Boishakh, obviously, because like it's I don't know, it's just Bengali New Year, and it doesn't associate with like any like religion specifically, and it's for everyone.
Yeah.
So I remember the last time I went, there was this like one procession where they had like the Bangladeshi like LGBTQ community as a part of the procession, and that was really cool to see, just like with all the colors, and like it was just fun. There was a lot of backlash from it, but regardless, like during that specific time, it was just very special and like wholesome too. But I think the whole point with like Pohila Boishakh, or like Bengali New Year, is it's kind of a way to forget about the bad things of the past and to start afresh, but like be more accepting of like all the differences that
Yeah.
we have, and just to kind of unite as one. So it's really cool. The music school that I used to go to in Bangladesh, they're the ones that host the the festivities.
Okay.
So they have this whole like music program starting from like dawn, and it goes on to like late, like in the morning.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. It's really hard to get a place to like sit, because everyone's just on the ground, like there are no chairs. So you're either like standing or you're just on the ground. Um, so it's a very humbling kind of process, because you're literally just one with the earth,
Mm,
and you kind of forget about all the separations in your community, like social class, like separation through social class, or separation through like, I don't know, religion, whatever it is. You don't really have those separations, and you're all just enjoying that one thing. You're celebrating what makes you like, Bengali. Just, yeah, it's cool.
yeah, I really like that. Like, what makes you Bengali? And it doesn't mean, what your social class is, where you come from, what your background is, but it's just like this universal sort of energy that everyone's involved with. I'm curious to know what your cultural journey has been like.
Um, so I kind of moved back and forth between like Bangladesh and the States, um, where it was very different, because in when I'm back in Bangladesh, I'm never fully Bengali. I'm never fully brown. And then when I'm here, I'm brown.
Mm,
Like people see it in my skin color, and it's just evident like that. Um, I I still like deal with it. It's funny because it's something that hasn't really changed. I still deal with the same issues that I used to deal with growing up. Like right now, um, to my friends, I am brown because that's me. But when I'm back in my community, it's always almost like I'm too like whitewashed.
mhm.
Um, or like my mom would often say things like, "Oh, like why can't you like read and write Bengali?" Um, and she would get really offended if I'm having a conversation with her, and most of the times it's in English, and she's like, "Oh, it's almost like you don't know how to speak Bengali."
Uh,
Um, yeah, and I remember a couple years or months back, I don't know when we had this conversation, but I remember us having this conversation where it was like, "Oh, I feel really bad because I feel very brown, but a lot of people in the community keep keep saying that, oh, I'm too whitewashed. And I like what you said, and it really stayed with me, that you kind of create your own journey, and it's about your personal journey and how you connect with your culture. So for me, like, I personally love being Bengali, and I love seeing myself just as how I am, like whether it's Bengali, Canadian, or whatever. Um, it's just it's just who I am, and I don't really see it as like my identity as having sort of boundaries that, oh, I need to kind of know how to read and write Bengali fluently to be Bengali. Um, I've kind of broken out of those stereotypes in sense, where I'm more like, okay, so I'm Bengali because I like speaking in Bengali. I love the music, the literature. That's how I kind of connect. And it's something that I realized over the last, like, this quarantine period, because I've done so much self-reflection, that that's kind of how it's always been for me. Even when I was a kid, in Florida, my aunt and her friends, they would have this thing called a music jalsa, like get together festival thing where people would just come together and the feast, and everyone would like sing songs and stuff. Um, Even though it was like past my bedtime, I would still be out. I would still be like, you know, hiding from everyone, but I still like sit there by like the stairs or whatever and just like listen to music. So, it's always been like that. I've always been able to connect to my culture through the language and the music. Um, so I think that's very important to know that um, there are aspects of your culture that you might not be able to identify with. So, so suppose like a lot of the I, ideologies or norms um, in Bangladesh that I don't personally identify with because it's so different from me. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it's important. Well, what I'm trying to say is I think it's important to understand that some of the aspects of culture are based on where you're staying, like geographically. And it has nothing to do with you not being like brown enough.
Yeah.
But obviously, there are going to be some things in your culture that you will be able to relate to, whatever that is. Maybe it's just through language, or maybe it's just, you know, by looking the way you look. So yeah, I think it's important to like kind of know those things.
That was really powerful because I feel like a lot of South Asian folks that are staying in Canada and sort of having that Western influence and exposure in their lives, sort of it sometimes disassociates themselves from their ethnic origins and whatnot. And I think that's something I definitely dealt with, sort of again, as you said, seemingly being too whitewashed or not being Indian enough, and sort of being very confused in terms of where I stand, until you get to realize that, as you said, you really get to define what that culture means for you, right? Because you are who you are, and that cannot be changed. And at the same time, there are still so many ways of connecting with your culture and sort of having that sense of pride, which is so important. I sort of coined this phrase that culture is everlasting, meaning that it comes from our ancestors, but it's also ever changing because, it sort of incorporates the flavors of the current generation. And so I think that's sort of what makes it very special.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Really cool. I'm curious, what kind of, I guess, cultural values and practices are important to you, and how do they affect you in your everyday life? And maybe you could also speak more towards how you incorporate, art into your own life?
Um, I think in terms of like cultural practices, um, yeah, like I think mostly the sort of cultural practices that I have kind of just revolved around like music. I love Bengali literature as well, but I have certain limitations to how much I can interact with that. Because like I don't really know how to read. Um, so whatever like Bengali literature I've read is kind of just a translation.
Mm,
But again, like everything gets lost in translation. Like the real essence of um, the kind of the colloquialism of the language, the essence of the feelings of people, it just kind of gets lost in that. So I wouldn't necessarily say that literature is a way I connect with it. I do, but to the most extent, I think it's music because I speak the language, so I understand um, quite a bit what they're saying. So sometimes like I won't understand what they're saying,
yeah.
and I would like immediately like call my dad and be like, what is this word? What does this word mean? And he would like try to explain like kind of the gist of the songs and stuff. I also love watching like old movies.
Ooh.
That's one of my like guilty pleasures. I love watching old Bengali movies. So every time I would like go back home, I would always watch like old Bengali movies with my parents and stuff. Um, so yeah, those are some of the ways in which like I really connect to it, the culture. Um, Apart from that, like I think a big part of like how I relate to my culture is through my family. Um, Sometimes like I don't agree with the sort of things that uh, like their ideas about certain things. Um, Specifically when it comes to like how they see women, but I kind of try to understand where they're coming from and their place, and I always try to like put out my point so that they know that where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think that's also really important, sort of knowing that there are many differences in generation, right? And
Mhm.
I think what you said in terms of, basically trying to understand where they're coming from, and but also at the same time, making your point heard as well, because it's sort of like
Mhm.
sort of, you know, coming to that common ground, I suppose, where there's that understanding of each other. That's really cool.
Mhm.
But we are nearing the end of the chai chat, so I do have one final question for you. Um, and it's how can we better preserve our ethnic cultures? Now as we progress as a society and move towards globalization and sort of the era of technology, how can we better connect and preserve our cultural values and even the festivities?
That is a really good question. Um, I think a big part of our culture is language. Um, and I think being able to um, speak it or like understand it um, is a big step because once you kind of understand the language, you can understand um, like other kind of smaller aspects of the culture. Um, so like how people in that culture think, or um, or even to be able to connect to like things like music or like movies. Um, it's a lot harder to be able to connect to those things if you don't know the language, I think. So I guess making some room to like understand the language, if not, even if like you're not able to fully learn it, um, that's a big step. But I think another big step would be just to Um, Acknowledge that this is a part of your identity, and not to disassociate yourself with that from that. Because sometimes we try to like, disassociate ourselves from being brown because there's so many negative stereotypes to it. We're almost like, oh, oh yeah, I'm brown, but I'm not that brown.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong, because you kind of you're kind of not just disassociating yourself from being brown, but also from other people in your community.
Mm.
And that that really isn't fair, because if you're not comfortable being a part of your community, people won't really see you and your community as like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know how to explain this, but
No,
that's just how I feel.
I think that actually it's something that I hadn't really considered, but um, even just visibly being brown, but then internally how we advocate for our brownness, we're not only advocating for ourselves, right, in our own personal connection, but in a lot of senses, as you're saying, we're advocating for our own communities, right?
Hmm.
And um, and but that's not to say that there should be a lot of pressure, like, oh, I need to sort of represent my entire community in everything that I do, but
Yeah.
it sort of just happens through, I think that's more of a natural result of one just connecting personally to their culture.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, yeah, I don't know, like sometimes if if someone calls me Indian, I'm almost always offended,
Mm,
because like I'm not Indian. Yes, I'm South Asian, but I'm also Bangladeshi. And I like people to kind of know that about me. But sometimes at one point it kind of gets tiring, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's exactly what I am.
yeah.
Um, so I don't know, it's just it's hard.
Yeah.
Like being present as a part of the community that you reflect, or that you represent, but
Mhm.
also being yourself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and I think that's the reason why I decided to start Chai Chats. Because being South Asian, you're a part of an extremely diverse and large collective, right? And as you
Hmm.
said, there's this misconception that if you're brown, that you're automatically Indian, but
Hmm.
South Asia consists of so many different countries and
Yeah.
cultures and ethnic backgrounds and languages, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think, yeah, I think I was really appreciative to have you on today, and I think a lot of people can connect with your story. And, the conclusion that you made, that basically you just need to be you, and you don't really need to fit into these traditional boundaries, because again, culture is everlasting and ever changing. So you get to
Hmm.
define what you make of your own culture.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much
guys.
for having me.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative, and I'm really happy to see you as well. It's been so many years, and
Yes.
um, yeah, I hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yes, absolutely. I will see you soon. Thanks for having me again, and I wish you best of luck with everything.
I really appreciate it. You too.
Okay. See you. Bye.